Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, we acknowledge the importance of seeking to avoid civilian casualties. That's what the motion David Cameron will put before MPs tomorrow declares. And it's a pledge which has underpinned British involvement in the Allied action in Afghanistan and Iraq, backed by claims that modern munitions have become much more accurate. This programme has seen records showing the Ministry of Defence has paid out less than £1 million to the families of some 360 civilian casualties. But as Paul McNamara reports, they're just the ones who've come forward.
Another night, another air raid launched on Syria by coalition forces. And tomorrow night, our fighter jets could be joining them. It's an endeavour, we're told, which will see few innocent civilians killed.
I believe the truth of the matter is this, that the British capabilities are one of the best ways to reduce civilian casualties. In a year and 3 months of the action we've taken in Iraq, there have been no reports of civilian casualties. We believe that we have some of the most accurate weapons known to man.
But can war ever be 100% accurate? What of the cost of our previous conflicts? Channel 4 News has analysed extensive logs released by the Ministry of Defence for the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. They show civilian casualties are higher than previously thought. The MOD paid out for its part in the deaths of at least 362 innocent civilians, some from airstrikes, many from troops on the ground. That's less than a quarter of the 1,661 deaths of innocent civilians alleged to have been caused by British forces. The vast majority were in Afghanistan, where the government paid out for the deaths of at least 333 civilians. In Iraq, the number was much smaller.
Now, tomorrow, MPs over there will be taking a vote as to whether or not to start bombing raids on Syria. Now, a key factor in that decision are our precision weapons, and much has been made of that by government. But what's been spoken about less is what we can expect of the 70,000 rebel troops on the ground. And as we know from bitter experience, even the best trained forces in the world can make mistakes.
So what value did our government place on the lives of these innocent people? In total, the MOD paid less than £1 million in compensation for the deaths of almost 400 men, women and children where British forces were involved. The lowest payment? Just £86 for the death of an innocent civilian in Helmand in 2007. The British government paid just under £600 for the death of a 10-year-old boy in Helmand in 2009. And £666 for the death of an 8-year-old girl. On average, we paid just over £2,000 per civilian killed in Afghanistan. That's roughly 2 years' salary. Some of the casualties were from airstrikes, now the plan for Syria. 2 small girls were killed in 2 separate airstrikes in Helmand's Nari Saraj in 2009. The family of a 5-year-old girl received just under £1,300, while the family of an 8-year-old girl received around £660. 8 innocent people died in mistaken Hellfire missile strike in Babaji in Helmand in 2009. The compensation? £5,000 for each of the 8 killed. This man's family died in that strike. Channel 4 News met Sufi Abdullah in 2010, shortly after he lost 2 sons and 2 brothers. They were all sitting by a river, he told us. He set off for home early.
Suddenly, I heard the sound of a blast. When I turned, I saw that my son and brother were lying on the ground, unconscious and covered in blood. One of my sons had injuries on his head, legs and hand, and I had to push him on a cart to hospital.
Tonight, the MOD told us,
while military operations are never without risk, UK forces strive for the highest level of accuracy, which is why we use precise, low collateral systems supported by thorough intelligence. However, where civilians were proven to have suffered as a result of military action by UK forces in Iraq and Afghanistan, it is right that compensation was paid.
In Syria, the government claims that by using high-tech weapons like these Brimstone missiles, civilian casualties will be minimal.
It's cloud cuckoo land to think that any conflict in Syria right now will lead to no civilian casualties. Bombs are reliant on intelligence to guide them to the right places and the right targets. There are always mistakes. there's always a missile that goes astray and hits a civilian target. Our intelligence in Syria so far has proven to be pretty poor throughout this conflict.
Tomorrow night, MPs will decide whether we go to war. If we do, it may be many years before we find out just how precise our weaponry is.
Well, with me now to discuss the Syrian conflict is the International Development Secretary, Justine Greening. Justine Greening, the Foreign Affairs Committee has voted this evening that the Prime Minister has not adequately addressed their concerns. Does that give you any pause for thought?
Well, we'll be having a very long debate in Parliament tomorrow to be able to discuss all of these issues and indeed the variety of issues across the House. But we should be very clear that the action we are putting before the House to take is about dealing with a clear threat that ISIL poses to our people on our streets in our country. And we shouldn't ignore that threat. We should be dealing with it. The vote tomorrow is about giving our parliamentary approval so that we can extend the bombing we've already been doing in Iraq against ISIL into Syria and take action against them there as well. And in doing so, protect lives here in the UK.
OK, well, one of the things that some of your own MPs are concerned about is this claim that there are 70,000 moderate Syrian fighters waiting in the wings to defeat ISIS. Have you in the Cabinet had a breakdown of what that 70,000 consists of?
Well, there has been an assessment of that. That's been done by the intelligence agencies here in the UK.
Have you had a breakdown, though?
There was a breakdown given to parliamentarians in a briefing that we gave to them early this afternoon. And what that assessment comes from is our own intelligence agencies who've assessed 70,000. It's a number that's also shared and agreed with by the United States and also independent observers like Charles Lister of the Brookings Institute. So
OK, but a lot of MPs aren't satisfied by the detail they've had. For example, I mean, you cite Charles Lister there. I mean, do you concur with the figures that there are 120 different groups making up that 70,000, and one of those groups has 58 factions? I mean, that is a ragtag army, if it's an army at all, isn't it?
I don't think that's correct. I mean, clearly there are lots of different groups on the ground. The work that our intelligence agencies has done has suggested that there's 70,000 moderate fighters there. Of course, many of them have been fighting now for several years. So clearly you may describe them as ragtag, but these are people who've managed to fight against President Assad's Syrian army, but also increasingly been under pressure from ISIL themselves, which is why we are right to be extending our bombing from Iraq into Syria. It's nonsensical to have a strategy in the end that can only go to the Syrian border but not into Syria. ISIL doesn't respect those borders, and we need to be able to react to the reality on the ground, which is that if we're going to combat the threat ISIL poses to Britain, we have to deal with it wherever it is, and that is also in Syria, where they're headquartered.
OK, and if you are to deal effectively with ISIS, some military sources are even suggesting that the West could use some of Assad's own troops.
Well, in the end, there needs to be a broad coalition of forces on the ground that will come up and fight against ISIL. But there are really two things that we will need to see happen to get to a long-term, peaceful, stable Syria.
But broad coalition could include Assad, just to be absolutely clear.
If I can just finish, Cathy, one of those is the continuation of the diplomatic and political process that's been underway in Vienna for several weeks now, which provides the potential track to reach a transitional government and a long-term, stable outcome for Syria.
OK, but you're saying you concur with those military sources. So, sorry, we're just running rather short on time.
And I just want to clarify,
if you're saying
that is in relation to dealing with ISIL.
I'm sorry, we're really running short of time. If you could just answer this point about the use of Assad's troops, the West basically deploying Assad's troops against ISIS. Is that something you're prepared to consider in the British government?
That is not what I have just said to you. What I have said to you is that we need a two-pronged approach in order to get a long-term future for Syria that's peaceful. One is this political, diplomatic track, but the second is tackling ISIL. ISIL also poses a clear and growing threat to the UK itself. Last year, ISIL perpetrated 15 attacks worldwide. This year it's been 150. We've already seen Britons killed by ISIL attacks. If we do not deal with them, we will see those attacks on our own streets against our own people in our own country. It's why it is vital that we see the vote passed tomorrow so that we can have a strategy that means we don't just deal with ISIL and bomb them in Iraq, but we can play our role in helping to do that in Syria as well.
Justine Greening, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So our political correspondent Michael Crick is outside Labour Party headquarters in Westminster, where thousands of Stop the War protesters are marching past. Michael.
Yes, well, all around me are protesters shouting, "Don't bomb Syria, no more wars." My colleagues reckon there are about 800, maybe 1,000 protesters on this demonstration. It started off in Parliament Square, where they were addressed by, among other people, George Galloway, who argued that this would be a war that didn't even have the support of the Daily Mail. They've made their way down here past the Conservative headquarters, but particularly now they're congregating round the entrance to the Labour Party headquarters, and there's a particular anger amongst these protesters that tomorrow there's going to be a substantial number of Labour MPs backing the government. We don't know at this stage quite how many. Some think it could be as many as half of the parliamentary party. Some say as little as 30 or 40. But that is certainly the mood of anger here tonight, that this is could be an attack on ISIL in Syria that has substantial Labour Party support, despite Jeremy Corbyn's own personal opposition.
Michael Crick in Westminster.